So my name is Gopu, and this is the first of the two book reviews that we do today. This one is about Genghis Khan, a book written by Jack Weatherford, which is slightly different from most others. As you go through the lecture, you will get the perhaps the connection to why I am talking about Genghis Khan at a TieCon conference. So, to start with, what is Mongolia? This is probably the image we have of Mongolia, a vast steppe land, a lot of grass, a lot of horses, horsemen, tribal communities, right? And that's true. And perhaps beautiful tribal women in very colorful costumes, and hunters with falcons, and Hollywood images that perhaps we are most familiar with. But this is modern Mongolia. This is their capital, Ulaanbaatar. Globalization has reached there. This is what it looks like. In fact, it looks better than most of the metros in India. This is also Mongolia. It's a mall there, slightly distorted because of the, aspect ratio. And these are also symbols of Mongolia. There is a major monastery there. There are mosques and churches. The statue that you see of a man seated on a horse, the golden statue is of Buddha actually, or Maitreya Buddha. The statue that you see of the horse is the statue of Genghis Khan in the largest central square of Ulaanbaatar, the capital. And now it used to be called Suk Baatar Square, after the founder of the modern Mongolia in the 1920s, after the Soviet Union really took over. And now it's been, when the collapse of the Soviet Union happened in the last 15 years, it has been now, the statue has then been installed and it's been renamed Genghis Khan Square. And you can see the bottom corner, that's the airport. It's spelled Genghis Khan, which is how the Mongols spelled it in English. Alright. So now Genghis Khan has been described as the most feared man in human history, in his lifetime and later. Let's put it in perspective. Let's explain how that is. When the Russians took over administration of the Mongols, Mongolia was not part of the USSR. It was a separate country, but effectively they had their puppet regime there. Basically, they created, so there is a place where Genghis Khan is born, a place where he is buried, and some of his descendants are buried earliest. That is effectively sacred land to the Mongols. And they kept most other communities out of there. Whoever invaded after the collapse of Genghis Khan's empire, and others took over, and they still restricted people from coming in there. Most people wouldn't go there. When the Soviets finally took over, they created a bureaucratic area called a highly restricted area, which is 1 million hectares in area, which is roughly 10,000 square kilometers. That's half the size of Kerala. And they forbade any Mongol from going there. This is the Soviet Union under Lenin, then under Stalin. And outside the highly restricted area, they put an even larger, less restricted area, which was also, very difficult to get into. Why would they do this? Stalin was one of the most powerful men in human history, especially of the 20th century. He was an absolute dictator. Lenin and Stalin, when they formed the USSR, they came from nowhere. They were a fairly primitive country with very little manufacturing ability. They built tanks, submarines, fighter planes, aircraft carriers. The Second World War, it was they who took the brunt of Hitler's attack, and they marched their army straight into Berlin and forced Hitler to commit suicide and effective surrender of the Nazis. Before Harry Truman, who took over from Roosevelt, became president, when he became president, Roosevelt, Stalin and Churchill had combined to form an alliance to beat the Nazis, the Triple Axis, the Nazis and the Mussolini's army in Japan. And at one conference, when Roosevelt had gone and Harry Truman had come in, Truman walked up to Stalin and said, "We have invented a new weapon." He was talking about the atom bomb, which is a result of the Manhattan Project. They were the only country then, the United States was the only country. Now he expected to cow down Stalin even though he was his ally, and Stalin said, "Good, I hope you use it." Which they did. they bombed Hiroshima and they bombed Nagasaki, right? When they asked that to Stalin what his reaction was, he said nuclear weapons are weapons to frighten people with nerves. They are, they are not there. I'm not afraid of them. This man was not afraid of Hitler. This man was not afraid of Mussolini. He was not afraid of Japan, which was his neighboring country, which bombed him. He was not remotely afraid of most of his rivals, though he put them in Siberia and all that. And he was not afraid of the atom bomb. In fact, he launched a project, and very quickly they also acquired atom bomb. They went on to expand. They acquired an arsenal of 10,000 nuclear weapons. They assembled long-range intercontinental ballistic missiles. After his death, they launched Sputnik, which is the program that he launched in the rocket system. Utter and complete, lack of fear of the world's only nuclear power, which had used it twice. Right? This man is not afraid of anything. Why would this guy then create something called a highly restricted area to prohibit the memory of a man who had been dead for 700 years? No reason to fear. The Mongols are a small country with 4 million people now. USSR had 250 million people. They had stood up to all the powers. They had come from nothing to become, a challenging power. And they were creating something called a highly restricted area so that the Mongols wouldn't remember or, be mobilized by somebody who had died 700 years back. Impact of Genghis Khan, right? Tremendous. But what attracted to me the book was not the terror that Genghis Khan inspired. It's the subtitle. Genghis Khan and the making of the modern world. What does the most brutal, savage, most feared man have to do anything to do with the modern world? Modern world starts maybe 200 years back. How could you ascribe this to them? What we think of as modern world? Democracy, electricity, secularism. These are the slogans, right? We have political slogans, we have principles, philosophies, maybe cars, bullet trains, transportation, right? We have had bullock carts and horses for centuries. Suddenly we have cars and ships and steamships and diesel engines and planes. That is the modern world, right? That's something we recognize. The end of epidemics, the end of famine, with modern medicine, modern agriculture. Perhaps that is the modern world. Food like pizza and iPad, the symbols of globalization, electronics, Facebook, the fact that a middle class person can vacation in Europe, middle class Americans can vacation in Japan, they can go to, that ability that you can go all over the place. Or social changes, gay people having rights, the end of caste, untouchability abolished, the end of racism abolished, gender rights, women becoming leaders of, becoming Supreme Court judges and commanders of armies and fighters. This is the modern world. Religion, perhaps abolishing it. The number of people who don't believe in religion or don't kill for religion. That thing. These are all modern words. Even we now have claims like, the VAT and Aadhaar are, that's how we are going to go into the future. That is the symbol of the modern world. These are the what does Mongolia or Genghis Khan have anything to do with the modern world? So then he goes on to talk about it. But here's another take on it. Václav Smil goes to the era before computers. He writes a book called Creating the 20th Century, and he argues that the modern world was created between 1867 and 1914 when 4 major technologies or groups of technologies came in that never existed before and completely changed the way we did things before, human beings interacted. One was electricity. Power went from animal power and perhaps coal power. Coal power is only 100 years old before that, or diesel power, to electricity, a completely different, the symbol of modernism that we talk about, right? Diesel engines and petrol engines, we have taken them, we criticized them as negative things that cause pollution. But the modern world would not run without, globalization is not possible without them. We take cars, trucks, ships, planes and trains for granted, and they are, except for cars which run on petrol, almost everything else runs on diesel or maybe kerosene planes. But that's really the power behind modern world. Globalization, transportation, that's what it's critical. That's what makes us modern. Or chemicals and materials. Mostly we had natural materials, right? Almost wood, our furniture was wood, our implements were iron, our vessels were bronze, right? And that was it. And most of our material was rope and cotton and silk, which are all 2,000 years old, coir. But from the 1867, steel, plastic, aluminium, copper, all these silicon, all these materials became suddenly available, and we had, whole material solution which we completely take for granted. This is also a very valid argument. And communications, we went from, people transporting messages by post, usually sent by horses or, slow people walking, messengers, or maybe ships, that was it, to phones, radios, television, and cinema. So this, he says, the age of synergy is the creation of the modern world. And he says, everything has been, and Václav Smil, author of a different book, says, everything has been given credit for the modern world, including computers and antibiotics. So far that one person has even written a book doubtfully and, suspiciously giving credit to Genghis Khan for creating the modern world, and he's basically tackling this book, criticism of this book. I am more in agreement with Václav Smil than with Weatherford, but we'll see what Weatherford's theory is. My opinion of modernity is some of these people created it. James Watt with the steam engine, completely changed from animal power to mechanical power. Lavoisier, he ended the oldest system of chemistry known. For 2000 years, we had this theory that air, water, fire, and these things, the earth are the four elements. We now have a periodic table. He completely changed our understanding of chemistry, right? Edison, I have nothing to say about Edison, everybody knows it. Rudolf Diesel, Henry Ford changed mass manufacturing, completely changed everything. Fleming with his antibiotics, medicine effectively starts only in the 1930s or so, modern medicine really. And retail revolution, how we shop is today vastly different from how people bought goods or sold goods for thousands and thousands of years. 20th century is big for the retail revolution, and even banking, I would say. Right. Here's another problem. There is something called historical bias. Winners write history, so they call Alexander the Great, but Attila the Hun. Now ask a Hun what he thinks. People call Alexander the Brutal or Alexander the Conqueror, not Alexander the Great, and he say, why not call Attila the Great? Because he is the first great Hun, right? Ask a Mongol. Have you ever heard of the phrase Genghis the Great? Let me ask a more relevant question. Why not Edison the Great or Lavoisier the Awesome, right? Why do only brutal conquerors or kings and politicians get all this thing? How many monuments do we have named after Edison? How many bus stands and schools do we have named after politicians who have nothing to do with those bus stands or those schools? How many airports do we have named after presidents and kings? And not one. How many airports are named after the Wright brothers? One small airport in Ohio. Not even a major airport in the United States. Right? Auto stands. You go to the auto stands, you have auto stands named after Bharatiyar and Netaji and Periyar and all kinds of M.R. Radha, Shivaji Ganesan. You have nothing about diesel or Nicholas Otto, who actually came up with the petrol engine, or Henry Ford. You never see that. Right? These people have all this, My favorite king and title of all time is a Chinese king called Yu the Engineer. We have no other king like that, right? That's fantastic, Yu the Engineer, right? So, Yu the Engineer, first I heard mentioned in John Green's listing. Second, Indian perspective. We are incredibly self-absorbed. We only care about Indian history to a large extent. Even the people who conquered us, we don't really learn much about them. How did the British conquer us? We only talk about how terrible the British were, not about exactly what they accomplished, and we learn very little about British history itself, or the Turks, or the Huns, or the Persians, or the Mongols, or the Greeks. We are only interested in how Rama defeated Ravana and Pandavas defeated Kauravas. We have no interest whatsoever even in how the Indian army defeated Pakistan. Not much, right? Why did Indians lose to Clive, who was just a clerk who came from England? We don't want to talk about that. Oh, they are terrible. But how did a clerk from, a little boy from England come and conquer a country here? We don't care about that. And we are even more apathetic about people who didn't invade us. We know something about those invaders and nothing at all about, great civilizations like Iraq, Egypt, Japan, China, and Africa. Africa I'm generalizing. But we learn nothing about it. We have, they are passing sentences in our history books. Genghis definitely didn't invade us, but he influenced us. How? Now here, I'm going to quote some statements from Jack Weatherford, but first, Imagine and try to understand what Genghis Khan did. I'll give an Indian metaphor. Imagine an Indian Genghis Khan, a tribal Indian from say a Bill tribe or a Thoda tribe, right, living in a forest, illiterate person. Not just is he illiterate, his tribe is illiterate. Nobody knows, they don't have a history of agriculture. They don't have a history of writing, right? They are not what you would call a civilization at all. They are not perhaps savages. They have customs and cultures, but they don't. That this person, a Bill or a Thoda tribal, then would raise an army that would conquer his entire country. Can you imagine? Then went on to conquer other great nearby civilizations. Let's say he conquered Persia, Egypt, China and Russia, and his children went on to become the Shah of Iran, the Pharaoh of Egypt, the Emperor of China, or the Tsar of Russia. What would you think of that particular Indian who did this? He would triumph over Rama and Akbar and Ashoka and Gandhi and all these people, and he would be the greatest. But that is exactly what Genghis Khan did. And he barely gets a mention. He comes from a tribal, illiterate society, from a country that has no history before him, almost no history before him, and he went on to conquer the largest empire in human history. Weatherford's metaphor is, imagine if the United States were created not by educated merchants or rich plantation owners, like George Washington was a plantation owner, or Thomas Jefferson, or John Adams, or John Hancock, Paul Revere, manufacturers and merchants, all those people, Benjamin Franklin, right? Businessmen and merchants and soldiers, ragtag soldiers who had no experience but managed to. Suppose USA created not by these people, but by an illiterate slave who liberated his country from foreign rule, united the people, created an alphabet, wrote a constitution, established universal religious freedom, invented a new system of warfare, conquered all land from Canada to Brazil, and established a free market zone across these continents. Imagine an American had done that. That was the accomplishment of Genghis Khan. That's what he did. Remember, we talk of the United States as a symbol of democracy, but George Washington's United States had slavery, no voting rights for women. The only people who could vote or run for office were white, rich men with land who paid taxes for those land. Women were not allowed to vote. Women got the vote not after Lincoln freed the slaves, but 60 years later in the 1920s. They freed the slaves but didn't give women the right to vote. You think that would be simpler? No. And those slaves still suffered under segregation. The liberated slaves suffered under segregation until the 1960s when Lyndon Johnson passed the Civil Rights Act. Genghis Khan did it in his lifetime. The illiterate man created an alphabet, wrote a constitution, established universal religious freedom, and this is the killer phrase, right? He established a free market zone across continents. So the book seems to claim that he was more like a Manmohan Singh of Mongolia, right? Not just a great, brutal dictator. Is this true? You'll see it. Genghis the Incredible. By today's standards, he conquered 30 nations in today's map. If you look at the map today, the land that he conquered was but if you measure that by the number of people he conquered, by the countries he conquered, or the area he conquered, he still beats every other conqueror by twice. So, twice the land that perhaps Alexander conquered, twice the population that any Chinese or Ashoka conquered, twice the area of any other large kingdom that perhaps including the British Empire. And the British Empire did not was not conquered by one person, right? The British Empire took 200 years to fully establish itself, right? So more than twice as much as any single individual who conquered anything, right? He captured more lands in 25 years than the Roman Empire did in 400 years. From a tribe that only numbered 1 million people in his lifetime, and his army was Indian Railways is 1 million people, 1.5 million people. His army is 100,000. That's smaller than Mylapore or Kodambakam, right? It's tiny. And with that, he conquered an empire from the Black Sea of Turkey to the Pacific Ocean, and pretty much all land. Just to give you perspective and not run away with it, there are other people who have, larger empires than Genghis Khan, and that would be organizations like Coca-Cola with its market base that is bigger, Nokia, Google, Facebook, all have, more perhaps reach, and even cultural practices, yoga, and perhaps Kung Fu Panda and Sunny Leone today are more famous than even Genghis Khan is. So, but that's just to give you a touch. This is the map. It's an animated map. It starts with the territory that Genghis Khan conquered, of which he was only, see, that's where it starts, right? And this is how it expanded. And then its sons ruled these areas, and the sons are his descendants. The largest contiguous area, largest empire under any man. Alright. And compared to that, these are the other great conquerors. Rajendra Chola, right? The largest conqueror of the Cholas. He didn't really cross through the land, most of the pink segment that you see there. He conquered almost all of South India, went up to Kalinga. They called Gangaikonda Chola. Genghis does no such territories, right? You can name every river in Asia and say, except Ganga, and say he conquered all of them, but he doesn't call himself that, right? You can also call Clive as Gangaikonda Englishman, right? They don't call him that. Very simply Clive of India, right? Or Samudragupta. The first small green blob is what area that Chandragupta calculates. Most of Bihar and some parts of Europe, some parts of Uttar Pradesh. Samudragupta captured most of North India, and his son Vikramaditya expanded it into parts of Gujarat. Ashoka conquered more land 300 years, 400 years before the Guptas, conquered almost all of India except the Tamil country. But it pales into comparison to what Genghis did, and even Alexander, one of the greatest conquerors of all time, well before him. The Mongols gave the world no technological breakthrough, did not start a new religion, wrote few books or plays, developed no new crops. When the Europeans went to America, America was fairly primitive, right? That is the Native American tribes. They only had 3 or 4 kingdoms that had some bit of history. Only the Mayans had literacy. None of the cultures had a wheel. They didn't have horses. Most of them, were hunters. Only very few were empires. The Incas, the Mayas are the only real empires there. And the Mayas are inherited from the Olmecs, and the successors to the Mayas are the Aztecs who ruled most of Mexico. And they had very limited agriculture. They had a combination. They had human sacrifices. The horses that are famously associated with the Native Americans were not native to America. They all came from the Western Europeans who conquered them and the horses that escaped and then bred in the wild, which is what the Indians basically conquered. Okay, but crops like the potato, the chili, the squash and maize, corn, came from America. The Mongols gave no such crop. They are just vast grasslands. There was nothing from there. They could not weave clothes. They only wore clothes based off, yak hide or horse hide or, cow skin or sable or, furs like that. They could not cast metal. They had to get these products from nearby civilizations like China or the Uyghurs or the Uzbeks. They could not make pots. There is no Mongol pottery. They did not even bake bread. Right? Very, very primitive. They had no porcelain, no paintings, no monuments. Buildings are not a part of Mongolia. But, he says of Genghis Khan, one exception, Genghis Khan built more bridges than any ruler in history. It's an unusual statistic and a very impressive statistic. He built bridges so that his armies could cross quicker. Mostly bridges made of wood and perhaps some floating bridges made of boats to cross some of the rivers. Very similar to the military projects in the United States. Under Eisenhower, they created the interstate highway system, and later DARPA, the Defense Department, created the foundation of the internet. A lot of technology is generally built for one thing, military conquest, and then ends up doing something else. The British Navy effectively ended up becoming, the foundation of their merchant navy, right? So we see this. But the fact that he built the infrastructure to make his armies very swift also meant that people could transport goods very fast. So dramatically helped enable commerce. And that was one of their significant signal contributions to making the modern world. And more than goods, because they conquered such a large territory and they had no particular philosophy to impose on them, they enabled the exchange of ideas and knowledge. And this, he says, is the most lasting impact of the Mongols on, on the rest of civilization. They took German miners to China and Chinese doctors to Persia. So introduced new technologies from countries which generally would not exchange those ideas. Lemons and carrots went for the first time from China to Persia. Noodles, tea and cards again went from China to Europe. China was one of the most culturally advanced cultures at that time. But 10th century China was far more advanced than any other culture of that time. Carpets became a cultural product that spread all across Asia, mainly from Persia. They spread all the way to China and Europe. He commissioned the first, under Genghis Khan, Christians traveled to China and built the first churches there. Buddhists traveled to Persia and built the first temples and Buddhist temples and stupas there. And Muslims traveled to Russia and started building the first mosques there. Chinese gunpowder, European bell casting technology, and Muslim flamethrowers, which is part of their warrior mentality, all combined to give perhaps the one true technological contribution of the Mongols, the cannon, which completely changed warfare forever. Right? Before cannons, most people were fighting with, bows and arrows, catapults, or swords and spears. Cannons completely changed it. The way you attack the fort, the way you attack cities, the way you attack enemies, it suddenly, is a force multiplier of dramatic change. Only the internal combustion engine and airplanes would change, perhaps warfare more significantly after that, and machine guns. The Mongols, when they went to Europe, slaughtered the aristocrats, but they found that Europe was much poorer because it was in the middle of the Dark Ages. By the 4th century to the 5th century, Dark Ages, Roman Empire had collapsed. Effectively, one stage of the Roman Empire had collapsed. Christianity had settled. Europe was going into the Dark Ages that they would stay in until about the 13th century when the Renaissance was triggered. Europe was really substantially poorer than either China or the Muslim lands of Iraq, Persia, and Uzbekistan, Central Asia. So they stopped. They lost interest. They did not bother. The Mongols did not bother conquering Europe because Europe simply didn't, possess things that China and these other countries would possess them. Europe suffered the least, but acquired the most from Genghis Khan's conquest. Eastern technology, knowledge, and goods triggered the Renaissance in Europe. So it wasn't directly possible the causal effect of the Renaissance, but the ideas and the transport and the products that he transferred. Europe effectively learned printing, firearms, the compass, and so on from China. Francis Bacon, one of the earliest writers of science in England, says the great leap that Europe made, which made them slowly advance over others. And he says the superiority of European civil cultures comes from 3 inventions: printing, gunpowder, and the compass. Poor Francis Bacon didn't know that all 3 were invented actually in China, and transported to Europe thanks to the conquest of the Mongols. He was writing 200 years after the death of Genghis Khan. Roger Bacon, a later successor to Francis Bacon, had a very different take on the Mongols than we do today. He said the Mongols succeeded not merely by martial superiority, military superiority, but by means of science. We never think of Mongol science. They were eager for war, but devote their leisure to principles of philosophy. Remember, this was an illiterate society. Genghis Khan died illiterate. Okay? And he says, this is what he, talks about the Mongols. Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, 100, 200 years older than Shakespeare's literature, the oldest literature that we have in England, in English. His longest story is actually about Genghis Khan. How many of us know that? This poem, one of the poems in the Canterbury Tales, talks about Genghis Khan. It says, the king was called Genghis Khan, who in his time was of great renown, that there was nowhere in no region so excellent a lord in all things. This is the praise that he had, and this is the larger poem in the Old English of Chaucer on the left, where he calls the noble king Chambus Khan, right? And this is the modern translation is this one. I'm not going to read it. It's just you can go look at it in Google if you want. And what I have mentioned so far is just the introduction of this book. I have not even gone into the 10 chapters that starts with the birth of Genghis Khan and continue into his later exploits. That's just the introduction chapter. Just I'm highlighting some paragraphs, statements, and things that they did. Now, really don't want to, get the impression that Genghis Khan, I don't want you to come to the conclusion that Genghis Khan is more significant than Edison. He was very important. He did change a lot, what his accomplishments were, but there was a tremendous amount of brutality. And that's reflected in the three segments, three parts, titles of the book. The first one is called The Reign of Terror on the Steppe. Some of the terror was suffered by Genghis Khan, and later on it was inflicted by his. Then what he calls the Mongol World War, when the Mongols were actually quite happy just being Mongols, were pulled and pushed and prompted into attacking other kingdoms, and we'll see and how they became a world power. And then Genghis Khan was born in 1162. He died at the age of around just slightly past the age of 70, 74 or something. He died. So 1260, his successors took over, and 1262 they had conquered China and they had expanded all of that. And the Yuan dynasty in China had been established, and some of the effects of the Mongol Empire would still take place for another thing. But look at what he talks about the global awakening. He puts it at 1262 to 1962. That's 700 years. He talks about the effect. One of the things that really interested me was finding out that one of Genghis Khan's descendants, because his descendants, some of them adopted Buddhism, some of them became Muslim, some adopted Christianity. One of his descendants effectively became the Dalai Lama. And the spirit banner, the emblem, the spear of Genghis Khan, which is horsehair, which is how they, the Khans remember themselves, was protected in the Buddhist monastery for 300 years. A book called The Secret History of the Mongols was stored in Buddhist monasteries, but Buddhism was not allowed to build any monastery in the actual place where he was born or in the area that would later become the highly restricted area. Because the god of the Mongols, the basic tribe, was the eternal blue sky. That was their genuine god. And so, while they tolerated all religions, they wouldn't do it. Temujin was his name, and Temujin was 45 years old when he became, effectively conqueror of all Mongolia and adopted the title Genghis Khan. 50 when the Golden Khan of Beijing ordered him to submit to him, and only in the next 10 years he was battling mostly the Chinese and other Uyghurs and other tribes to the east and south of Mongolia. And at the age of 60, he was insulted by the King Sultan of Bukhara, and that's when he really started conquering the world. 60 is the retirement age for most people across the world. 60 is when Genghis Khan became conqueror of the world. That's when he started his global career. The book called The Secret History of the Mongols, this book was only rumored to exist for several centuries, but this was compiled during the time of Genghis Khan and of his later descendants, and was protected by the Mongols and was kept secret from almost all foreign scholars. So most of the later stories about the Mongols came from defeated tribes who only talked about brutality. So Persians and the Iraqis and the Chinese who talked about how they came and raced. So all we have is most of the stories of brutality. But this all the more confusing because because the Mongols had no native language. They adopted the Chinese script, which was used to write the Uyghur language at that particular point, and then later the Cyrillic script also and the Syriac script also. It was not written like this, left to right like the Chinese do, but from top to bottom, and that was used to write letters or sounds of the Mongol language, which was not even the same family, because Chinese is in the family called the Sino-Tibetan language family, and Mongol belongs to a different language group called the Altaic language family, which has ties to Korean and Japanese, but not to Chinese. So the language is different. Okay, the sounds in that language are different, but they're different. This is, if I could say it, it's like writing Silappadigaram, right, in maybe the Devanagari script, which was brought to you by the Roman Empire. So kind of confusing, right? And that's effectively what we had, because they didn't have something native. So there are no portraits of Genghis Khan. It was preserved by Mongol historians, even though there were attempts to suppress it even until the period of Stalin. But once the Soviet Union collapsed, we had an era of globalization. People were curious about Mongolia. They could fly into Mongolia. You don't have to go via horseback or worry about the Soviet Empire or infiltrating. Now it became, part of the global culture. And then scholars like Jack Weatherford, who was an anthropologist in American University, went and interacted with Mongol archaeologists and Mongol geographers and Mongol historians who could go around and trace this the places that Genghis Khan visited. He said he went for a 6-month project, ended up being 5 years, and with I won't even try to pronounce the first name there, Ilkhagwarusan or whatever it is, and Kha Parli and Sukbatar. Sukbatar is the name of the founder of the modern Mongolia, but also the name of a geographer who collaborated with Weatherford to write some of this history. So this is Central Asia. It's mostly the people that we are familiar with are the large tribes, and after whose names the nations come along. Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan. Those are named after the people who lived there. The Kazakhs, the Uzbeks, the Kyrgyz, the Tajiks. These are tribals. The names like, those are like the Telugus or the Tamils or the Bengalis. The names that you give them, right? So those people form this. Mongolia is kind of a smaller country than even Kazakhstan, sandwiched between the great civilization China and the northern tundra, right? Russia there is mostly Siberian tundra, right? It's not really much civilization. Mostly steppes, mostly herding communities. And Temujin was born to one of members of one of the several small tribes of Mongolia, a lady called Hoylun, his mother, from a small tribe called the Olkunud tribe. Hoylun was given in marriage to a person called Chiledu of the Merkit tribe. The Merkit tribe was slightly richer than the Olkunud tribe. But while Chiledu actually paid a bright price for his wife. So what he had to do is to earn his wife. The women of this particular tribe were apparently extremely beautiful, so they wouldn't, the one way to get married is get this arranged marriage where you go and work for your wife's family for a year, and they think you're worthy enough to have her, they send her with you. The other is to kidnap women. So this guy was a warrior, but he went to this tribe, worked for them for a year, they married him, and he was taking his wife back to his tribe when a rival tribe called the Taichud and one of 3 of their warriors came and attacked the caravan of this husband and wife. There were just 2 people going along. Now here comes the interesting part. Yasuge, the man who would kidnap Hoylun, make Hoylun his wife and would eventually father Genghis Khan, told her husband Chiledu, run. There is no way. He said, you will not survive if you stand here because those 3 soldiers will kill you. They will not kill me because they have only come to kidnap me. They'll take me, one of them will marry me. You on the other hand, you will find some other woman. Call her Hoylun. Remember me. Here's my blouse. She took off her blouse and said, threw it to him. And then he did the intelligent thing. He saved his life. Because if he had stayed, they would have the 3 warriors of the Yasuge and his brothers would have killed him. So he did the intelligent thing. He ran away. So they didn't chase after him. They simply kidnapped Hoylun. Yasuge, so she didn't marry one of the younger brothers, but she married the eldest brother Yasuge, who already had a first wife called Sochigel, who had a son. So she married him. She knew that now that her status was going to be much poorer than she would have been if she had been continued the first wife of her first husband. So she then developed 5 children. She had 5 children, the first of whom is Temujin. The story that says is Temujin, why he was named Temujin? Yasuge had gotten into a battle with a Tatar and killed one of their small chiefs called Temujin Uge. So he decided to name his son after the man he killed. Now think about how ridiculous that sounds. Imagine if Gauri Muhammad named his son Prithviraj or Arjuna named his son Duryodhana. We can't imagine that. But this is the culture, the strangeness of the culture that we are not prepared to understand. The word Temul is where the word Temujin comes from. And a Mongol scholar told Jack Weatherford that the word meant this phrase, the look in the eye of a horse that is racing where it wants to go, no matter what the rider wants. It's a very complicated sentiment. Perhaps it very essentially captures what the spirit of Temujin was. And they would like the word so much, Yasuge liked that word so much that he is named his younger brother of Temujin also Temuge and a younger sister Temulun. So the same words come along. Temujin's clan was not a rich herder tribe. The major tribes in Mongolia were herder tribes that would, had horses, yaks, and cows and sheep, and so they had plenty of milk and skin. That was their major food. They had not too many crops and tubers, mostly meat and fat and milk. Horses' milk and horse meat was one of their things, major things. But these people were actually on the edge of the steppes and the forests, and so they were basically getting food, hunting for food, hunting animals, hunting rabbits and deer and small marmots and things like that, and that was their products. What they could dig roots and things like that. So they were even among the Mongols, they were a poorer tribe. They were not a richer tribe, and they were a smaller tribe. They were outside. All of Mongolia is outside the Silk Route, so they didn't get any of the benefits of the international trade. The Silk Route was a long route. Nobody traveled the Silk Route all the way before the Genghis Khan's empire. People would go from one place to another. That would be a trading station. Somebody else would buy something from there, go to the next trading station, and then that's how the Silk Road operated. Once Genghis Khan had conquered an empire, the entire region became so safe that you could travel from the Pacific to Europe and not be molested. That did not happen before this thing. But the Silk Route had been in existence for a long time. I'll show you a picture of this. So this is their culture. In the lean years, hunting tribes like the Taichu, the tribe of Yasuge, his father, what they would do is they would raid the richer herds, richer tribes. So they go attack them, but they are not attacking for honor and battle glory and the greatness of having conquered warriors. The Mongols are very, very, very pragmatic. Shedding blood is not something that they really didn't like. They would run away from blood. They attacked. They would kill when they had to, but that was not their primary intention. They wanted only to loot. They would only kill if they couldn't get the loot, and the only way to defeat you was the loot. So the soldiers invariably, pragmatically would run away. If they were outnumbered, they wouldn't stay and fight and say, oh, glory. None of the Kshatriya culture, none of the samurai culture, none of the military culture that we talk. They're very, very, very practical. They say, you're going to take a woman, there's nothing much you can do, we'll attack somebody else and take the woman. That's how we operate. That's how the culture operates. And pragmatism, not chivalry, ruled it. And it is important because if the men got murdered, in a raid, then whoever was left, and they usually leave old women and very young children behind. They wouldn't take them, right? They only wanted, young girls and maybe young boys who could work. So they would leave them behind, and if they left them behind and killed the men, there would nobody to take care of them. So the men had to, save their own lives. This is the Silk Route, and you can see most of Mongolia and all of Russia is well outside except European Russia, is all well outside the Silk Route. So they didn't get a lot of benefit from the trade from. So to continue Temujin's story, Borte is somebody who would eventually become his wife. What happened was Yasuge was worried that his Temujin's elder brother, half brother Bekter, and Temujin would develop a rivalry. To prevent them from killing each other, he decided to take Temujin when he was only 9 years old and tried to get him married to a member of the Khoilun's tribe. But halfway through there, he met some other friend of his, saw his daughter Borte, who was slightly older than Temujin, stayed there. They realized that these two kids liked each other, so the parents, offered to betroth them. He was, basically betrothed. So Temujin would now work for Borte's family for a year or two. That would pay the bride price, and Borte would marry him. That was the plan. While this was the plan, Yasuge was returning back to his family. He met the Tatar clan of whose leader Temujin he had already killed, right? The original Temujin that he had killed. Tried to pretend that he was somebody else, but got caught, got poisoned, and died. So he left his son behind. Suddenly he orphaned his entire family, right? Yasuge's brothers did not decide to take care of Yasuge's widows and children. Two widows, Chokigal, the first wife, Bekter, the first child, Temujin and his other younger brothers, but decided to abandon them and run away. But Khoilun, offended by the fact that they would abandon her, you would abandon your own brother's family, took the spear and the spirit banner of her husband, chased after these two people on a horse, screamed at them until in shame, because that spirit banner now represented the soul of their brother, and they would not go against the soul of them. So they had that superstition. So they ashamed, they came back, they stayed that night, and while they were all sleeping, they took their families and sneaked away at night. So So they came back only in the morning because they were ashamed. And when an old man protested that, it was unfair of them to leave the widow and children behind, they simply killed that old man. This brutality really offended Temujin. He felt really, sorry for the old man and could only sob that his, family could not be trusted even to take care of his brother's children. Hoylun, while they were abandoned, Hoylun didn't give up the spirit. More than the first wife, she is the one who took a lot of effort. Went hunting, gathering, look for crops, braved the harsh winter, managed to save all the children, feed the children. They had they ran out of horse hides and cloth hides. They would hunt rats and hunt dogs and made skins of those, and that's what protected them from the winter. And this is a woman of great enterprise that managed to save the family. And shortly after that, they survived that. In the spring, one more, another kin of, they got some refuge with some another side of the family, and a young boy called Jamuka became a good friend of Temujin. They became swore eternal oaths of friendship. They, swallowed each other's blood. Horrible stuff sounds like, but they, swore friendship like that. So Jamuka would become his friend for a while. In the meanwhile, Bektar took over the family, right? The elder half brother, the son of Xochitl, the first wife. Now, according to Mongol tradition, a widow would be married off to a younger brother, but the younger brother didn't want somebody with 5 children. So, if they had an elder son from the elder wife, Bektar would now have the right to marry Hoylun, even though she was his stepmother, and continue the family, effectively because he became the head of the family. Now, this Temujin really didn't like the idea. Hoylun kept supporting Bektar because he was just going with the Mongol tradition. He didn't like him at all. At one point, he got really annoyed at the bossiness of Bektar and was so brutal he planned to kill him. He actually conspired with his younger brother Kasar and decided to kill Bektar. And they sneaked up on Bektar. Bektar was just fishing at the stream. Bektar was shocked, but did not give up his status. Did not fight back. He said, "I am your protector. I am your father now. If you kill me, you are being stupid. You will have I am your best chance because I am older than you, stronger than you, and I can protect you against any other attack. If you kill me, you will have no companion but your shadow." This is a powerful phrase apparently in the Mongolian language. You will have no companion but your shadow. But Temujin was not willing to listen. He was brutal. He had seen brutality and he killed that guy. When he went back, Hoylun screamed at him, called him betrayer, traitor, murderer, criminal. You are like the dog that eats its own afterbirth. She called him all kinds of terrible words. Now, Yasuke, his brother of the Taichu tribe, had abandoned this family, but when he committed murder against his own half-brother, the family went from outcast to Temujin becoming a criminal. Now they hunted Temujin to punish him. They wouldn't support the family, they still wouldn't help the family, but they said what you could do was murder, so they decided to punish him. They chased him, he went and hid in the mountains and prayed to the god of the mountain and the eternal blue sky god to protect him. The way you end the prayer in Mongolian is you finally end like the Christians say Amen. The words the Mongols said was Huri, 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 which now becomes our hooray, hooray, hooray. It's not English, it comes from Mongol. So he was hiding there, but the tribe caught him. He was still, not incompetent. They made him a slave. And this small section of Mongolia, where there's this little blue stripe, that's the Onon River. This Onon River is where most of his life is spent. He never, and a nearby river called Kerlem. And that's where he grew up. That's where he was captured. That's where he was enslaved by his father's tribe. He was captured and put in something called a kangu, which is like a yoke, but it's like a strap around your body, a leather hide kind of strap around your body. It held him so tightly that he could not feed or drink, by himself. Somebody had to feed him. It would cut into his skin. There are some histories that say he was slave for 10 years, some for 1 or 2 years. For the Mongols, this is perfectly normal, but for other cultures, it's shocking that somebody who was a slave could then become a Khan, and so they had difficulty dealing with this history. One of the other slave families of the Taichids actually treated him very kindly. They took care of him. They removed the kangu at night, which was potentially dangerous for them because they could have been punished more severely for relaxing him. An old lady tended to his raw wounds. And Temujin one day, while he was in the company of a slightly retarded boy of the Taichut family, hit him, ran away with still in the yoke, hid all day long, and came back that night to the family that helped him, putting them in great danger, because if they had been caught, they would have been punished perhaps with death. But that family undid the kangyu, right? They burnt it, they gave him some food, and they made him, helped him escape, and he ran away. When he ran away, he went back to find Borte, where, he was a slave for several years. He went back to, Borte's family. The father of Borte still waited. She was 17 years old at that time, which is very long for Mongols to wait. They usually got married at 14 or 15. She waited for him. She agreed to marry him. So did the father-in-law, effectively Borte's father. And they got married. And as a bride gift, a bride usually apparently gives a small gift to her husband, she gave him a sable coat. A sable is a kind of an animal that lives there. The fur of that sable was used. And he didn't use it for himself. He went in search of a stronger man. He went to a man called Khan, who was a friend and who had asked Yasugei to fight the Tatars, the guy who killed Temujin. He went to Khan, offered Khan the sable, effectively asking him to treat, respecting him as his father. Khan would know his father. Khan accepted because, he had some pity for the boy or liked him or something like that, and said, you are now under my protection. Not that the protection meant much, but technically I accept your gift and you will now be under my protection. Right? Temujin just wants to live in peace now. He's endured slavery, he just wants to live normally. But now another irony happened. The Merkit tribe of his, the first husband, Chiledu, who ran away because, Yasugei attacked him, that tribe now says, this is the time to attack this. They remember that story, so they come and attack. Whom do they attack? Do they attack the brothers of Yasugei who actually kidnapped? No, they attack Genghis Khan and his brothers, who are actually victims of that kidnapping, right? So they attack him, and they come to kidnap Borte, who was the young woman. Now Genghis Khan leaves behind his wife, but takes his mother and his sisters. Look how strategically he thinks. You think you take his wife also, but he knows that once they kidnap Borte, they will not come after his mother or his sister, right? So he leaves something valuable behind. He leaves also his property behind, takes his brother, takes his mother, and leaves behind his wife. The wife was kidnapped by this Merkit tribe. Now, Chiledu, when Huailin was kidnapped, just gave up. Said, okay, they have taken it, there's not much we can do. But Genghis Khan wouldn't do that. He went to Khan for help. He said, I want to attack the Merkit tribe and I want to rescue my wife. For some reason, Khan also wanted to attack the Merkit tribe, well with him, and he helped him, raise a, army, sent an army. They went and attacked the Merkit. He rescued Borta. This was several months later. He brings back Borta, and one of the people who helped him was Jamuka, his childhood friend with whom he swore the blood oath. And Jamuka and this guy again are, tight friends. They helped him rescue his wife. They wandered together. But Jamuka is of a more aristocratic clan called the White-Bone family, whereas Genghis Khan is considered of a Black-Bone family. So Jamuka doesn't like it when Genghis Khan, Temujin tries to assert some sort of equality. He is fighting a battle with him, but in peace, and he tries to acclaim status, he doesn't like it. Here's the other problem. Borte is found out to be pregnant and delivers a child soon after rescue. Whose child is it? Was it the child of a Merkit warrior, or was it Genghis Khan's own child? They didn't know. He named the child Jochi, or as Ravi Shankar told me, it's actually Zuchi, he says. And that word means guest in that language. Now, did he name him guest because the child is a guest in the family, or because he was staying as a guest with Khan? We don't know. But that was the name that he gave him. Then after a while, he got into a rift with Jamuka. And at one particular point, he defeats the Taichi tribe of Yasugei and rescues the family which, helped him when he was a slave, right? When they undid his gang and with all the kindness, he rescues them, he, frees them from slavery and treats them well. He's in great gratitude for that family. Then there is something called the Jurchet tribe. The Jurchet later on became famous as the Manchus or the Manchurians. They would later capture China in the 16th century. But the Jurchet tribe in this period were ruling northern China in a place called Zhongdu, which now we call Beijing. The Jurchet asked Khan of the Karaite tribe to attack the Tatars. Ong Khan naturally asked Temujin to return the favor. Hey, I help you, I rescue that, now come and serve for me. You fight for me. Temujin agrees, but he looks at what's happening. The Jurchet, a very powerful, rich, long-distance tribe, is deliberately provoking wars among all these things. They are effectively following a divide and rule policy. So no tribe here gets strong. This he doesn't like. You are exploiting us. We will fight for you, but what you are basically doing is exploiting us. He doesn't like this. There is an endless cycle of war, and they all suffer from this. There are all shifting alliances. He doesn't like all this. But he is observing all this in this period. Then he goes and observes the wealth of the Tatars. When he attacks the Tatars, he uses very interesting military tactics. He chases the farmers. The farmers go into the Tatar towns. He attacks the smaller towns. They go into the larger towns. Suddenly there is a shortage of grain. There is inflation in the price of food. There is all kinds of unhappiness. The Tatar kings themselves abandon their country because the army just keeps attacking and retreating. Genghis Khan's tactic was never to attack and finish. You attack, create terror, go back, and then attack, create terror. All kinds of psychological things. They didn't like it at all. Genghis Khan encounters the wealth of the Tatars and the Jurchet, and I'll read a passage what he talks about. What the kind of goods that they encountered. These were people who had only hides and sable coats and mare's milk and protein, right? It was just meat. Silk, satin, brocade, gauze. Bundles contain whatever objects the Mongol eye fancy. Lacquered furniture, paper fans, porcelain bowls, metal armor, bronze knives, wooden puppets, iron kettles, brass pots, board games, carved saddles, jugs of perfume, ochre, yellow lead, indigo, flower extracts, fragrant waxes, balsam, musk, hair ornaments, jewelry, ivory, tortoise shell, turquoise, pearls, cornelian, coral, lapis lazuli, emeralds, diamonds, wagons loaded with skins of wine, casks of honey, bricks of black tea, incense, medicines, aphrodisiacs, cinnabar, camphor, sandalwood. The tribal sees the wealth of an agricultural civilization and he looks at his own culture's poverty and he says, we need to get that. So he aspires for this. Now, the wealth of Tatars would have an influence on him. And finally, with the final battle against the Tatars, he employs a strategy that earns him the great reputation of the greatest butcher. He assembles captured, right? All the soldiers are captured, the ones who didn't flee. He assembles every man, lines them up by height. Anybody who's taller than the axle wheel of their carts is beheaded. All men taller than that are beheaded. All boys and all women are spared, and they are integrated into his tribe. He takes one of the young Tatar boys called Shigi Kutuku and asks his mother to adopt him as his younger brother. So he does a complete massacre of all men of fighting age, adolescents. Anybody who's older than 12 years old is probably beheaded, right? Everybody else is not, treated as a slave, but included in his family. And this is something he would do it again and again. After this tribe became called the Tatars, because the Tatars are actually the larger tribe. So Genghis Khan's clan became, people started calling them Tatars, because the larger Tatars are included in the smaller Mongol tribe, essentially. So this is what he did. And he would do this to every other tribe which didn't surrender immediately. If the tribe stood up, if a country stood up to him, a complete massacre of men, and then complete integration of women and children. But once you form kinship relationships, by the way, this is what Perseus of Athens did that when he founded the city of Greece. They attacked a country, kidnapped all their women. There is a rape of this thing, but that is rarely read about. Anyway. In the meanwhile, Jamuka had become, raised a large tribe, declared himself Gur Khan, which is great Khan in his word. There was a battle with Jamuka. Because of his military superiority, Jamuka's army, kept shrinking. Jamuka escaped with a small band. Genghis Khan relentlessly chased him. Temujin at this point relentlessly chased him, but he kept hiding. Jamuka effectively lost the battle against Temujin. Temujin now becomes a very big Khan, but he's still not calling himself Genghis Khan. Now he is almost as rich as Ong Khan.
So he goes and asks Ongkan, give your daughter in marriage to my son Jochi or Zuchi. And then Ongkan first refuses, saying, no, I am a superior clan. You may help me in battle, but you are an inferior clan. Then he is afraid because this is the most effective military warrior he has seen. So he says, no, why don't you come along and we'll offer this thing. When Temujin goes with a small band leaving his army behind, trusting Ongkan, because he's trusted him for 20 years, he's been acted as a father figure. Then he realizes one day before he reaches that Ongkan city, that Ongkan has actually planned to massacre them. When they realize that, they run away. The small band runs for their lives for, miles and miles. They run for days and days without stopping for food and water, because that army, if they catch them, they will all be massacred. While they are running, they drop dead of sheer half this little clan that is running dies of sheer exhaustion, starvation, lack of water, thirst. Only some of them survive. 19 or 20 of them. They're a very small band really went trusting him. 30, 40 people went and nearly 20 of them died. And they had run so far that these people stopped chasing them, sure that these people had died of exhaustion. And at that time, like an omen, a wild horse comes along. They hunt, they kill the wild horse. They skin that. They cut its meat. There's no vessel to cook it in, right? So they heat some rocks because they can light fire. They heat some rocks. They off the skin of the horse. They fill it with water. Put the flesh in that water. Then put the heated rocks in that boiling water. Which what happens now? The rocks don't tear it because the water stops it from tearing the skin. But the heated rocks then end up heating the water, which then makes the flesh cook, and then they eat that. This is the kind of technique that they use where they have no vessels to cook with. So manage to survive, eat, and he says that horse is an omen from the great God, the eternal blue sky. This means there is no way I could have survived. No way you guys, my most loyal friends could have survived. In Jammuka's battle, actually, he is once hit with a poisoned arrow, and a friend of his called Jelme spends the whole night sucking the poison from him, spitting the blood. Then he, in desperation, Genghis Khan asks for mare's blood, horse's milk. There is no horse's milk. So Jelme strips off all his clothes, goes to the enemy camp. When naked people think that you're getting up in the middle of the night and going to relieve yourself, so they don't look at naked people. So he's not identified. He manages to go into the enemy camp, take some mare milk, and bring back to Genghis. What loyalty he inspired for a guy to risk his life going to the enemy camp after sucking all the poison and spitting it. And when Genghis Khan wakes up and sees blood all around him, he asks what happened, and Jelme tells him. And he makes Jelme becomes his most loyal lieutenant for the rest of his life. He becomes one of his great soldiers. Then they defeat Ongkan. Ongkan's son is killed. Ongkan as a lone warrior goes somewhere and then is misidentified and killed by a random soldier. He captures Jammuka. Jammuka is betrayed by his own closest friends. Now, when they bring Jammuka to him, he beheads his friends, saying, loyalty is the first criteria that I admire. You betrayed your friend. If you had merely surrendered without betraying Jammuka, I would have accepted you. But you betrayed the fellow. That I cannot forgive. Jammuka is my old friend. He offers Jammuka friendship, but Jammuka says, no, I will always hate you. I understand that I have been defeated, but in my heart, I will never forgive you for the defeat that you inflicted on me. So just give me an honorable death. I will die, and Jammuka, is killed and buried. Then Temujin calls himself Genghis Khan, calls what's called a Kuriltai. He calls all the tribals to form a large council. Those who come agree to his leadership. Those who don't come obviously don't. He rejects the old title of Gurkhan and names himself Genghis Khan, which the Persians have pronounced Genghis Khan, which is why he knows his name. Chin is the word that he takes from wolf in the Mongolian language. So he learned from his lessons of all this conquest that loyalty is more valuable than kinship, and he bases his army on that principle. Not on nepotism and tribal relationship, but on ability, talent, and loyalty. He organizes Mongol warriors in groups of 10, 100, 1,000, and 100,000. The unit of 10 is called the Arban, 100 is called the Zagun, 1,000 Mingan, and 10,000 the Tumen. And the leaders of the Tumen are selected by Genghis Khan himself. Each Tumen is headed, the army of 10,000 is headed by the most loyal, the most favored, the most brave warriors of Genghis Khan, and those 10 report to him. And this army of 100,000 would then go on and conquer. So he uses extraordinarily new technologies, right? He uses new formations like moving bush, lake formation. Lack of time, I'm going to skip talking about those. He uses psychological tactics. When he faced with Jammuka's army, which is a much larger army, what he asked his soldiers to do was set five campfires for each soldier. So the enemy looking at it would think that they have 5 times the army that they had. Psychological games at night. So each person is not lighting 1 fire, but lighting 5 fires. And it's not even, so you have, at night, the psychology would be that there's a large army, not a small army. You don't get any confidence, right? Then you take unexpected routes, dangerous, deadly routes. The Mongols could go longer and faster than anybody else, his people. And then he changed remember the principle of you loot and don't bother about killing? He changed that. He said, no. If a warrior is allowed to live, he'll come back. Either they integrate in you, surrender to you, or if they escape, go ahead and behead them. You will not touch one item of the loot until all the conquest is completely taken. Then kill all the leaders, kill all the traitors, but high reward for loyalty. So earn loyalty. And in victory, he didn't give only booty to the soldiers who survived, but also to the widows and the orphan boys, because he knew what he suffered when Yasuge was killed and his family was abandoned. He knew what that was, right? So he would marry other women from other clans and adopt their boys. Not just his mother, but even his wife was asked to adopt them. So this ensured soldiers now suddenly knew that even if they died in battle for him, their family would be taken care of. So they were much, much, much more loyal to him. Then he passed what's called the Great Law, effectively forming the constitution of the Mongols. He forbade kidnapping of women. His mother was kidnapped, his wife was kidnapped. He remembered those lessons. He abolished slavery of the Mongols. The man had suffered slavery. He knew what it was. So he forbade slavery among Mongols. He would still take slaves among other communities, but no this thing. Forbade all torture. Until today, no other culture in the world has done that. They would tell you that they pretend to abolish torture. Absolutely no democracy, no religion, no culture, no philosophy, nothing does that. Everybody still practices torture, even of petty criminals. But he forbade torture. He would kill people if they are enemy, but no torturing. The clans that continued could keep the laws that didn't clash with the laws of the Great Khan, the Great Last Khan. And it was not final, but it was a work in progress. So these are the laws that he came up with. Forbade animal wrestling. In a nation which substantially based its culture on kidnapping other animals, when they had it needed. He established a lost and found bureaucracy for the animals. Imagine that. A tribal chief, you can't imagine it today. If you lose something, chances are you're not going to get it. There is an Indonesian proverb, right? If you lose a goat and complain to the police, they will extract a cow as a bribe to give you back your goat. Today, that's 20th century, and we've seen this in most government departments. But he established one on a nationwide level. The penalty for theft was execution, even for theft, because theft would really condemn you to poverty and perhaps starvation. But the power of execution lay with the Kuriltai, not with the individual leader. So you couldn't use this to punish individuals for revenge. You had to really have a judicial system. Group responsibility. Effectively, he formed caste there, and group guilt. If one member of your group committed some crime, the entire group must punish him, right? Or the group would be held responsible for not punishing him, and they would pay the responsibility. And so you had to be a member of a group, and the group would be held responsible, and the group would be held guilty. Complete and total religious freedom. He did not impose his religion on any other community, any of the campus. In fact, he gave complete freedom for Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, and Manicians. One of the things that really impressed him was Buddhists and Christians would care for the sick people. That's not always something you could see in most cultures, but they really care for sick people. That really impressed a lot of the Mongols, including Genghis Khan. He exempted all religious leaders from taxes, and he abolished taxes on doctors, lawyers, teachers, and scholars, who he saw really improved a civilization and were really essential to the prosperity and happiness of a culture. So people who he thought were important, he would exempt them from taxes. Now the BJP and the Congress could learn something from this, but so be it. He appointed his son or his younger brother, not his own brother, but the adopted Tatar brothers as the supreme judge, and instituted a method of keeping records for all Mongol judgments, which would then be, paper was not their technology. Remember, they are borrowing paper from the Chinese. Then he attacked a city called the Tangut. He tried to flood them. They tried to divert a river to flood them, flood the city, which is a very different tactic. But that ended up destroying their own camps actually. It didn't flood the city. But they learned from that. And then from whichever tribe he conquered, or nation that he conquered, he would interview their engineers, to understand their technology, the military people, the strategists. He would interview scholars and learn from them. And he used these technologies to conquer others, and used, kinship relationships to make them part of his own larger empire. At this point, the old Khan of the Jurched, the later Manchurians, died. A new Khan was born. A younger person became the Khan, and he sent an envoy to Genghis Khan, saying, you must now submit, you must acknowledge that we are the ones who give you this thing, you must bow your head on the ground and beat your head on the ground and, swear loyalty for being a beggar tribe who owes his complete loyalty. This is not dialogue that works with Genghis Khan. It could have worked with any other tribal perhaps. The Chinese have been doing this for centuries. This really, really offended him. So he went and attacked Jurched. He used all his tactics, conquered them. Now he had tremendous wealth, right? Genghis Khan's army was fast because it was composed entirely of horse riding cavalry. They had no foot soldiers. They were some of the hardiest soldiers. Each man could carry 10 pounds of dried milk, and when they were hungry, all they do is dissolve that milk in the 1 pound of milk in the water, eat that, and they survive on it for a day. They didn't need fires to cook, as I told you in the previous this thing. They could survive without food or water longer than any other tribe or culture. They didn't need to take cooks with them. They didn't need to take food with them. Logistics they didn't need to take all the supplies with them. Okay? Nothing. Each man carried his own supply. So this became, the foundation of their most fleet and terrifying army of all time. Entirely an illiterate army. None of them knew how to read. How would you communicate to a person across the country? They came up with the concept that our rishis did, entirely in Sanskrit, right? Composed songs in messages. So you'd memorize the poem, and the poem would go as message, because poems usually have, they don't get distorted. People remember poems without distorting the words, unlike texts which get distorted all the time. He established a pony express. So the horses would be provided by the locals, but the riders would be Mongol. The Mongol riders would carry you, and they established a pony express essentially so Weatherford calls it the first postal system that the world was, across such a large system, such a large country. And Genghis Khan, most crucially, never asked men to die for him. He really, really valued the soldier. The only situation where they were fought was when they were absolutely certain of victory, or they had no choice but to fight. That was the only situation where he did it. So, and his strategic purpose, he did everything he could to preserve Mongol life, every strategy to preserve the life of the Mongols. Never fight unless you have a reason, and fight to win. And then, for 10 years, that's all he was doing. He was happy being king of the Mongols and getting money from China. Then he sent an envoy to Bukhara. This is a city in Uzbekistan, then part of a kingdom called Khwarizm, one of the learned kingdoms of that time. Khwarizm is where Bukhara is where a major Muslim scholar called Al-Bukhara went to Mecca to collect the sayings of the Prophet and compile it in the book called the Hadith. Bukhara is whom all the Bukhari restaurants are named. We call them Buhari, right? We are familiar with that. He is one of the most learned scholars. He is like Ramanujacharya, Adi Shankara, one of the major persons of this thing. But even more famous are Ibn Sina, who the Romans called Avicenna, and Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi, a great mathematician who got a translation of Brahmagupta's Brahmasputa Siddhanta and devised an Arabic book called the Kitab al-Muqabla al-Jabr, and from which we get the word algebra. He is the Muslim who effectively started algebra, and that was later borrowed by Fibonacci of Italy when he was a trader 4 centuries later. The Arabs at that time were great scholars. They were the most literate culture in the world. In India, only the Brahmins and the royals were Vaishyas, Brahmanas, Kshatriyas and Vaishyas were literate. In China, only the bureaucrats were literate. In Europe, only the Christian priests and royals were literate. But in Arabia, in Islam, in Persia, everybody was literate. Every man who wanted to could learn. Unless you didn't want to, you could learn. They had no hierarchies. They came up with algebra, alchemy, which became later chemistry, alkali, and the word algorithm comes from Al-Khwarizmi, the name of Muhammad bin Musa Al-Khwarizmi. This was a very cultured, civilized thing, society which was ruled by Sultan Muhammad II, to whom Genghis Khan sent an envoy just for trade. Sent merchants to simply sign a trade treaty. The governor, who is the uncle of the Sultan Muhammad, unfortunately insulted them. Again, supremacists, right? You are just merely tribals. We are a great culture. Insulted the envoy, chopped off their noses, and killed their merchants. Shocked, Genghis Khan then asked the Sultan to punish the governor, but he couldn't because the governor was his own uncle and his mother wouldn't let him. Right? This is considered, most historians call it, the greatest mistake in human history. If that fellow hadn't insulted Genghis Khan, he would have stayed Mongol king and he would have been forgotten. Genghis Khan decided to march against Bukhara. He marched against Bukhara. You have to remember, when he conquered Bukhara. In fact, the last major descendant of Genghis Khan still ruling was the Emir of Bukhara, who was dethroned in 1920 by the USSR. That was the last of the descendants of Genghis Khan. Okay. Because when he went and attacked Bukhara and then later on attacked Baghdad and all other civilizations, the Muslims would say then Sultan Muhammad by this mistake destroyed not a city but an entire world, and by world they meant mostly the Islamic world, because Islam almost disappeared from the face of the earth under the assault of Genghis Khan. So, military strategy, he went and captured the smaller towns. Psychological terror was his tactic, captured all the smaller towns, forced the refugees to flee, the same technique that he used against the Tatars. All of them went into Bukhara, created a tremendous atmosphere of panic and psychological terror. He sent another army under his son in a circular route, came to the west of Bukhara in the opposite direction, and they would then attack from here. They had no chance. Bukhara had no chance. All the engineers would, be carried along with them. They would cut down trees locally, build catapults, build this thing, He used all the technology that he could. Complete fear. Bukhara is beaten. The army escapes, runs to Samarkand. Sultan Muhammad and his core army run to Samarkand. He captures Bukhara. Goes into Bukhara, gets into that great mosque and says, "Is this the house of the Sultan?" He looks at the mosque and says, "This is the house of the Sultan." And they say, "No, this is the house of God. This is the house of Allah." This is something, Weatherford says, is the only religious building that Genghis Khan ever entered in his life, that mosque of Bukhara. And Genghis Khan said, "How can this be? The great God is the God of the blue sky. How can he fit inside a building?" They have no monuments, right? So, but then comes my favorite passage. He assembles all the rich men and the nobles of Bukhara who didn't flee, and he tells them, "It is the great ones among you who have committed sins. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." Nothing noble, nothing this thing. This man wants to terrify and wants the message of terror to spread. He didn't, if anybody exaggerated, the threat of this thing, he didn't want, panegyrics like the noble lord, the solar dynasty. He didn't want any of that stuff. He's the one who banned torture, right? But when his enemies are there, he is not, he doesn't want praise from the enemies. He wants absolute, undiluted terror is what he wants. So he says, "God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." It's one of my favorite passages. And he says, "We will find all your wealth that is above the ground." We know how to get that. But better reveal all your wealth that is hidden, or I'll completely annihilate you. Right? If you do show me all your wealth, we'll have the mercy of Genghis Khan. If you don't, complete destruction. And effectively, Bukhara is done. He captures Bukhara. Then he says, "Samarkand, I'm coming for you." Samarkand surrendered without a fight. Psychological terror. Then he captures a whole bunch of cities, right? Hazara, Isfahan. He is insulted. His soldiers are tortured. When the soldiers are tortured, he doesn't stand it. He sacks the city, completely destroys it. Okay, I'll read another passage. So we talk of him as a great, evil person who kills, savage and this thing. But this is another passage that he talks about a very civilized king, the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, one of Germany's great heroes. This is what he did. He tried to conquer northern Italy, which was called Lombardy at that point, the city of Cremona. His men beheaded the Italian prisoners and played with their heads outside the city walls, kicking them like footballs. The defenders of the Italian city then brought them to the city walls, pulled their limbs in front of the German invaders. Then these guys gathered more prisoners and executed them in a mass hanging. The Germans did that. The Italians retaliated by hanging even more prisoners. They are prisoners. Why are you killing them and torturing them? Right? They are not warriors that you are fighting in battle. The Germans took it one step further. Whatever children they had, they put them in the catapults and launched the children against the Italian city. These were civilized people. Genghis Khan never did any of this. No torture, no abuse, none of that stuff. He says, what was this? This is the kind of things that civilized people have done then and since then. The Americans used napalm, nuclear weapons, typhoid blankets, gulags, concentration camps. These are considered to be our great civilization. What Bhima did to Duryodhana, split his thighs open and drank his blood. Through history you can see all so-called civilizations do unbelievably brutal things. And all brutal things are assigned to considered the greatest, the most terrifying warrior, and he didn't do that much damage. Okay, I think I'll finish with this. He was eventually defeated by the Egyptians. That was the only force that stopped them, probably because of the heat. They really hated heat and humidity. And also I think the bows didn't work as well because the bows that they had worked much better in the temperate climate than in tropical climate. The invasion of Japan, they launched one from China. But that was defeated more by a typhoon than by the actual army. That was the two defeats of in Genghis Khan's period. He appointed Jochi to follow him, but Chagatai, his second son, refused to accept Jochi because he said, "You are an illegitimate son." The conversation was that he challenged his father that, how can a bastard become the emperor of the next great Khan? No, we want this thing. Decided that each son perhaps is better off having his own kingdom. Ogodai, his third son, is the one who becomes his successor. Because Chagatai is sent to conquer Bukhara and Turkestan, he captures all of it, he becomes Sultan of that place. But Chagatai dies shortly after Genghis Khan. Ogodai is his third son who lived longer. Even his first son, Jochi, actually dies before Genghis Khan. Chagatai's widow rules after Chagatai, and Tolui, his last son's widow, ruled China. The woman who ruled this thing. And Tolui, his last son's son Kublai, becomes Kublai Khan and founds the Yuan dynasty in China, which is what Marco Polo visited and stayed in, when he came and wrote about the travels of Marco Polo. This is what Genghis Khan did and his children did. Jochi and his son Batu Khan became members of the Golden Horde that captured Russia. Chagatai's great-grandson Babur was the founder of the Mughal Empire. In fact, the language that Mughals the Babur is actually a Turk, right? His language was Chagatai Turkish. The name, the dialect the word comes from his ancestor Chagatai, who was the son of, right? And he had some Mongol blood in him, but he called himself Mughal rather than Turk, because he wanted the honor of that name, right? They capture India. Ogodai's son Guik becomes Mongol Khan, the great Khan of the Mongols. Tolui, his two sons, one of them is Hulegu. He captures Persia and Iraq, and he established the Ilkhanate of Persia. And Kublai establishes the Yuan dynasty in China, which lasts for another 200 years. They captured all of Asia. This is the kingdoms that he conquered, and remember that the Mughal Empire is not there. I'm not listed. This is what the sons captured in his lifetime. Genghis Khan and his sons captured in his lifetime. Genghis Khan lifetime. Basically established silk route connecting east and west, the safest empire with the lowest taxes. He created the Mongol single market way before the European Union created one in Europe. Introduced paper to the west. Chinese paper went to the west via this. The pants and jackets that we wear are not European. They were wearing tunics and robes and togas, right? Togas are what the Greeks wore, and they continued. They come from Mongols. We are all in Mongol costume. The men here, our dresses is not European, it's Mongol, which then the Europeans adopted. But the Mongol law collapsed in 50 years. The Silk Route collapsed into segments. The large empire collapsed. The free trade market ended. The products stopped going to Europe from China and Arabia. Prices started getting expanded again, which inspired Vasco da Gama and Columbus to find new routes. And the rest is history. This is my last slide. This is the statue of Genghis Khan, Ogodai, and Kublai Khan in Genghis Khan Square in Ulaanbaatar. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Yes. After Tamerlane comes about 120 years after Genghis Khan. He is ruling from Samarkand, Uzbek. Tamerlane is Uzbek. He comes from Samarkand. He comes to invade India, but he's not Mongol. He's Uzbek or Turkish. There is a lot of confusion about which tribe is which and so on at that particular point. But I think Tamerlane is Uzbek. Right. But he didn't call himself Taimurid, right? Or Turkish. His mother tongue is Turkish. The language that he spoke is descended from the Turkish tribes, right? So Babur is nearly 1525. Genghis Khan was born in 1160. So this is, so he is descended from Mongols on one line, Uzbeks on another line, and the Turks on the third line. But he prefers to be called the Mongol, a Mughal.